from the Disney Channel, and they have like a 1 hour special today that Christina is a lot of random stuff happening in character about. Oh no! And this show is pretty popular, so now I
Are we good? Just let me know when you guys want me to start. Okay. All right. Mhm. Okay. I mean, it's fine. All right. Hi, guys. So since we have a small group today, I think we can make this a little bit more engaging, but we're going to be talking about branding in relation to making interesting products. So are you guys all comp sci? Yes. No? What are you? What is your major? All right. Gotcha. All right. Sounds good. So branding is very important, not just if you're a designer, but also if you work in computer science, and also if you work in marketing or business and all of this other stuff. Why is it important? It's important because you might have a great idea and be able to build it, and you might be able to convince others that it's interesting, but none of that stuff is going to sell your business or sell your product or sell whatever you create. Branding is what sells ideas. And if you don't have a good understanding of branding when you initially create your product, whatever it is, whether it's a website, whether it's a web app or a native app or anything like that, if it's not branded accordingly, people probably won't use it as much as they probably should, or you expect them to, which makes it very important for a lot of different reasons. So what is branding? It is the process of developing a name, symbol, and/or design that represents the identity of a product and differentiates it from other products. It's what makes you unique. Essentially, it's supposed to encompass who you are, who you want to be, and how you want others to perceive you. And all of that is very important, again, because it differentiates you from everyone else, all of the other products out there, because chances are if you're building something, somebody else has already tried it, or something else similar to it already exists. And you might be able to step it up with functionality, but you also need to step it up in terms of how you communicate it to the potential users you want to jump over and use your service. It is a business strategy, it is a marketing strategy, and you need to know a lot about human relations to be able to do it effectively. But it is a good skill for anybody creating anything to know, because that's, again, how you sell ideas. So like I mentioned, it is a business strategy. It's part of how that strategy appeals to users. As such, you can't treat it like art or anything creative. It is a lot more of a strategy-based thing. It is not personal to you. It is not based on your own aesthetics. It is founded in research and the identity of the company or the product that you want to create. So it is your business identity. It helps you stand out from the competition. It helps users recognize your business and your products. It helps build credibility and trust, which is very important, especially when you're launching something new. It makes compelling and recognizable advertising. It creates loyal customers and employees, and it helps you stay focused on what matters, which is very, very important. So does anyone have any idea of what makes a good brand? Does anyone want to take a guess? Yeah. Recognizable and non-topic. Yes, those are two important things. Any other ideas? That's okay. So a good brand should embody your values and your mission. It should define your relationships with your customers, with your users, but also with other companies. It should make you recognizable and accountable, and it shows what you and your product has to offer. And it should take into account very heavily your target user base, because that's the group you're trying to communicate to. So some tips when you create your brand is that it should clearly identify your company. It should make sure to clearly communicate what you do. It should tell a story. So a lot of times people think a brand is just colors, it's just a logo, it's just pretty fonts. That's not really what it is. In fact, those things are secondary to what a brand really is. A brand is an identity. An identity is more than just the visual aspects of things. It is how you speak, it is how you communicate, it is kind of what decisions you make, what values you stand by, all of that other stuff. And a brand needs to communicate all of that in a second. When somebody looks at an advertisement, when somebody sees your product on the App Store, when somebody does all of that other stuff. It's very important, because in that 1 second, it can make the difference between whether someone downloads your product or they just move on and find something different. About 80% of interactions with products and the results that happen because of that is due to visuals, not functionality. People don't even get to the functionality part. If it doesn't look good, they're not going to pursue, because it shows a lot of different things, including lack of quality and stuff, even if that's not the intent. So it's very, very important that you take the time to properly set all of this stuff up ahead of time, so that when you do advertise your function and your product, it makes a difference. So yes, it's to clearly identify your company. It should be unique. It should be different. You should make sure that you communicate what you're doing. You know, if you are a tech company, you may not want to have branding that is completely unrelated to tech. It's common that tech companies will brand themselves with the specific color blue, because that's become very associated with just the tech space, whereas environmentally friendly companies will brand themselves with the color green, because that's very associated with the environmental space. If you cross into other spaces in your branding, it causes confusions, and people may not even get to the part where they're like, oh, I know what this does, because everything else leading up to it throws them off. It should tell a story about your product. Why does it exist? Why is it there? Why are you making it for your users? And all of those things that are very, very important for you to communicate, because when you create anything, you know, whether it's for a hackathon and you're trying to win a competition, or whether you're actually working for a company and they expect you to build something for them, you may not be in the role of having to make a brand, but if you're trying to create a brand new product, you want to start a startup and all of that other stuff, you might have to do this. You need to know how to communicate all of that stuff. So when it also needs to weigh into your customers' opinions, in addition to telling a story. Like I said, you're trying to communicate things to the customer, or to the end user. So if you know that your users struggle with something, so for example, maybe a bunch of your users have poor eyesight, you may not want to design something or design branding that relies heavily on colors that are heavily contrasting, or so for example, neon green and neon pink. You put them one on top of the other, it gives you eye strain. That's going to cause issues for somebody who might have issues with their eyesight, might make it hard to read. You might not also want to put a very light color on a very dark background. So that needs to keep in mind, but you also need to keep in mind the culture and the culture of the audience. You wouldn't brand something in a way that's completely different to the values of the user group you're trying to reach, because that's counterintuitive. They're not going to feel like it's meant for them, and they'll just move on, which is not ideal in this case. You want to make sure you're also determining your reasons and your goals when you come up with your brand. Why are you making this product? And you need to communicate that and make that very clear through branding to your users. You know, some companies make things to make profit. That's okay. Some products are made to make a difference. And if you are a company that's made to make a difference and you brand yourself like all of the other companies that are just there for profit, what are the users going to think? That you're just there for profit, even if you're not. So it's very important that you actively communicate and establish your reasonings and goals. And it's also important to make the experience fluid but consistent. You don't want it to have to change drastically in every different context. You want it to have the same overall feel no matter where you use it, but you also want to make sure that it's easily adaptable to different instances. You also want to compromise between business and the consumers. Whoever you're making a product for likely has a brand. If you are building something, you'll need to build it within the confines of that brand. You're not going to be able to add your own personality into it, especially if you're working at a larger company. They expect it to look like them. If you are making a brand from scratch, again, you're working on a startup or you're working at a hackathon and stuff like that, you're going to need to determine that, but you're also going to need to determine it not just based on what your group wants or your startup needs and thinks is best, but also around the people you want to appeal to. It's a compromise between business and the consumers. It should be designed to withstand the test of time. What are some brands that you guys can think of off the top of your head? Google is good. What else? Sorry? Anything else? Disney's good, yes. So Disney's a great example of something being timeless. They have stuck with the same thing over so many years and they've just adapted it with the time. So have every one of you seen like a Disney movie? Yes. You know, the castle that shows at the beginning of every Disney movie. You remember how it used to be like just a white castle on a blue background, and then it updated and it became, you know, Cinderella's castle and it had CG and stuff, but the overall feeling stayed the same. And then they started adding additional stuff. It changes to the castle of every single movie, you know, it adapts to the environment, but it still feels the same. That's being fluid but consistent, and that's being timeless. Google's a very good example. They stuck with one piece of branding, and even though the font changed over time, the colors, the style, all of that stayed the same. Do you guys remember when Google changed the icons? So it happened like a year or two. You do? Yeah. So Google changed all of the icons and their designs in the set, and there was backlash. There was so much backlash. It was on Reddit, it was everywhere. People were just like, why are you doing this? It looks disgusting. We're never going to like it. Obviously, that's not true. People still use Google because it's like a massive brand, but that put a dent in their relationship with their customers. So when you're designing a brand, you want to make sure you do it right the first time. So that minimal changes need to happen in the future that could potentially lead to such a massive backlash. You also need to make it flexible to change. So for example, like Google was able to slowly over time adjust its font. Didn't change the overall feeling of it, but it made it more flexible. A very good example of this is the battle between Coke and Pepsi. Does anybody know the difference between the drinks just basically? No, they all taste the same, right? Right. Whatever's in the bottle, they just pour it out from one and it's literally the same. But they both exist. And for two companies with the exact same product to exist in a market, there must be some competitive factor, right? Otherwise, the one that came first would just completely outcompete the one that came second. In this case, Coke was the one that came first, and it established a brand based on timelessness, based on family, based on good old-fashioned values and stuff. It became the brand of the older generation of consistency. And people, especially old statistics show that older individuals do prefer Coke more because of those values, because they see in Coke their childhood, their lifetime, and they agree with those values. However, you have Pepsi, and Pepsi's entire brand, I kid you not, you can look this up, was built to be the opposite of Coke's because they knew they needed to appeal to a different market. They don't care about your parents. They don't care about your grandparents. They care about you and everyone younger than you guys. Their brand is based on usefulness, on being smart, on being different, on being creative and, you know, new and flexible, all of that other stuff. And that's how they advertise themselves, and that's how they market themselves, and that's how they develop their brand. To the exact same product, practically, with two entirely different brands, and they're able to coexist because they appeal to different audiences. When you're building something and it's in a market that other solutions already exist in. You're going to need to think about this. You know, what's going to make you different than something else that already exists, you know? And companies that you work for are constantly thinking about this. There are so many bank brands out there. And I know a lot of people like working for bank brands as computer scientists because it's good money to start, which is great. But the thing is that they need to differentiate themselves from each other in some way. Maybe it's in the services that they offer, the rates that they provide, but mostly it's just in how they look and the brand and the way that they advertise themselves. Another good example is State Farm. You guys all know what State Farm is, even if you don't already have insurance. It's because the brand just can't get out of your head. Jake from State Farm, everyone knows that guy. That is a brand. It's not just the colors. It's the way they talk to people. It's the mascots that they choose. It's the jingles. It's all of that other stuff, their mission. And that's what makes people go to them. It's because they resonate with a specific group. And that's very important. So when it comes to brands do have personalities, and it's very intentional because, again, it's designed to appeal to the people who share those personalities. It's also designed to represent certain things. So sincerity. If Amazon looked hella sketch, would people use it? No. But because it's based around the smile, around we'll get the packages to you, trust us, we'll get you what you need, people use it. And that's evident not just in their products and in their website and in their platform, it's present everywhere that they exist, every single outlet, because that's how a brand works. You know, excitement, Tesla is a great example of that. Red Bull is a great example of that. Competence, Google, there you go, Intel, Microsoft. And you can see that a lot of the tech companies fall in this competence line. That's very important because they need to communicate that to people. Otherwise, people wouldn't use their products because the digital world is a scary place and very dangerous. If they were not competent and they did not advertise themselves as competent, people would not trust them with their data. Sophistication. Apple's one of the ones that chose sophistication. Why? Because they came first and because they got to choose what things look like. They got to set the curve and be different. When you look at a MacBook, it's not bulky like a Windows. Sophistication is even in the design of their products, which is very important. When you come up with a brand, there's also identity. And this is just the standard brand identity chart. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take these little, markers, and you're supposed to move them to one side or the other of each of these matrices to identify which ones your brand feels like. So even now, like if you're working on a project here at Technica today, I would say try to think about doing this with that. And you'll probably appeal to more of the audience than you had originally because you're tailoring it to them. So the different categories is something more feminine or more masculine, So like Victoria's Secret, very feminine. Let's see, a lot of car brands, like big truck brands like Ram, very masculine, they're based on that. Simple or complex. Apple's design, very simple. I can't think of something that's very complex at the top of my mind, but yeah, so we're currently going through a design trend where things are on the more minimalistic, simplistic side, but it wasn't always like that because fads change, and design things change over time. So youthful versus established, Pepsi versus Coca-Cola, very clear example there. Subtle versus robust. So subtle essentially means like, do you want the brand to, like robust is, it's going to scream at you. Subtle is it's going to be just there, you're conscious of it, but it's not in your face. Again, Apple is a very good example of that. I'm not consciously thinking about the design of my MacBook, but when I'm typing on it and when my fingers move across the keys, all of that is designed and all of that is contained within the brand. It's subtle, you feel it. Classic versus contemporary. I would say classic. Car brands are usually the easiest way you can go about doing this. So I'd say classic, think Mercedes. Mercedes is very classic. Contemporary, Tesla. New age, in your face. Approachable versus authoritative. A lot of banks will be more authoritative. A lot of governments brand themselves more authoritatively versus more approachable. More fun things, casual things will brand themselves more approachably to appeal to a wider audience, especially things made for kids because they need to be approachable. Affordable versus expensive. Do you want this to be something that only the luxurious people of the world can afford? Do you want it to be something that makes people who don't maybe have a lot of money feel like they have a luxury product? That's how you use it. Playful versus serious, unconventional versus mainstream, industrial, like all of these are pretty straightforward from there on. But it's important to know where whatever product you're making falls on each of these. And from there, you're able to move forward with a brand identity. So most of a brand, in fact, encompasses the first two things. It encompasses its personality and it encompasses its identity. And that takes the shape of mission statements, value statements, your tone of voice, your key messaging, how you want people to view you. That is what a brand is. How a brand looks is what a brand is designed as. And that's honestly less important, because if you don't establish the identity first and the concepts first, whatever brand that you create is not going to match what you want it to match. So you want to keep it simple. You want to aim for memorability. Needs to be timeless, needs to draw people in over long periods of time, and they need to remember it. You see, one of the very good ones is how Apple branded the, I think it was like the iPod, or it might be like the AirPods or whatever. Those billboards where it's like a wash of color, and then there's a image of somebody, just like a silhouette of them dancing, and you see the white, that everyone knows that. You see that and you remember it because of it. It's so iconic. And then people might be like, oh, I saw that billboard while I was driving by. I didn't have a chance to read it, but I can look it up, and then they'll find it. That's something that gets people to come back later. You don't want to follow trends. Trends change. Again, like I said, you don't want to design something or build something based on what's relevant now. You want to build it and make it relevant forever. So look at the heart of things, which is people, personalities. That is more consistent. Habits stay the same over longer periods of time. You want to make sure it's relevant to your brand, relevant to what you embody. You want to aim for versatility. It should be able to work on a screen, printed, billboard, really, really small at the top head of a document, an icon, a favicon. It should work everywhere, and it should be flexible to adapt everywhere. It should highlight only the most important part of your brand, because that's the one that's going to stick in people's heads. And it should maintain your visual tone. It should be the same feel across everything. So what are some famous logos that stand out? Yeah. Sorry? Nike. Nike is a very good one. Did you know that Nike, the company, nearly rejected that logo when it was designed? It was designed by a college student. And they're like, nobody's going to like this. This has nothing to do with us. It's so basic and all of that other stuff. And she was just like, this is what I made. And it has built them a company. That one logo. That is that company, essentially, is that logo. What else? Apple. Yes. Apple. I mean, it's very simple. Oh, mine is covered. Anyway, it's very simple. It's just an apple with a bite taken out of it, but it symbolizes so much more. And you see that apple, you see that logo anywhere, instant recognition. And that's what gets people to buy your product. So another important thing is meaningful colors. And you don't want to just pick colors arbitrarily based on aesthetics. You want to use color theory and psychology. You want to understand what colors your consumers find appealing. You want to keep in mind accessibility. You want to think about how the colors will look in different use cases. You want to know what you're trying to communicate. Stick to 1 to 4 colors. Don't go over that, because it gets messy. It's a big mistake companies make. Too many colors, people can't identify with that because there are too many directions you're trying to go in. You want to ideally choose a primary color, secondary color, and a tertiary color. Understand what those colors mean and understand how they relate to each other in terms of color schemes. And then there's typography. So you want to understand the personality of each font category. You want to be honest about your budget and your license fees, because fonts cost money. If you're building something, you'll be keenly aware of that. Yes. How do logos what? NBC. So the thing is that their brand as a whole is not rainbow. Their brand sticks to a few key colors, which is, I think, the blue, if I remember, or red. It's one of those two, that color combination, blue, red, white. That's the brand. The logo works because that's the logo identity. You know, it's instant, it's recognizable, and it's grown to be recognizable over time. Like I've said, design trends change. Some brands get really lucky, like NBC. They might develop a really bad logo that just is based on trends like 50 years ago, but because people grew up with it, it's ingrained within society now, you know. So if you do it somewhat right during the times, it can become a staple, but ideally you want to design it to accommodate for future trends and current trends. So for example, the NBC logo is very old timey because it's very 3D and all of that other stuff. It doesn't fit with the flat vector art of the modern age, but it works because the older generation still identifies with it. But once the older generation is gone and our generation comes in, how many of us watch the news? You know, like it might not appeal to us in the same way. You want to make sure the typefaces work on different platforms. You want to use flexible fonts that have multiple weights. You don't want to limit yourself. You want to limit yourself to no more than 2 typefaces. You want to aim to use type families. So stick within one typeface. This is something that you as developers can do when you're coding stuff and how it looks on a website, on an app. Pick one, stick with it, use different weights and use them intentionally. You want to keep in mind the importance of spacing, and you want to make sure that the typefaces, this is falling all the way down. You want to make sure that the typefaces are high quality. So keep in mind kerning and all of that other stuff. I had done an activity, but we're kind of small, so it's okay. But these are just other bits of helpful knowledge to help you once you have developed your brand, actually turn it into something visual. But that's essentially this presentation and what I wanted to talk about. Branding might not seem relevant to everyone in different fields, but if you're a business person and you're trying to start a company, it's relevant to you. If you're a computer scientist or you're studying comp sci or you're a developer and you're trying to build a new product, or it's relevant to you, because oftentimes you are all that you have when you start a company. And if you need to be very versatile in order to do well to start, because you don't have the resources to be able to afford people who can do this for you. So it's good to be versatile. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
How does the about creating fonts work when you're working on a website as a brand, not a product, not a physical product, as a brand, you're like advertising on TV?
So how do fonts work?
I mean, I know like what a font.
Yeah, no.
But like when you're planning to have your logos that pop up, or in newspaper with large amounts of text that you see all in one shot.
Yes. So if you do a brand well, because chances are you're going to have both the website and the print version. So for example, New York Times, newspaper and website has to work both instances. Even if you make a physical product like Coke has a website, its branding needs to work on the website. So you want to make sure you pick things and you pick typefaces that apply and work in each instance. So for example, you might not want to use a cursive font for either case because it's hard to read. But another thing that you might want to keep in mind is, you know, sans or serif fonts look a lot better in print than they do on the website, right? So those things are things that you need to keep in mind. If you design a brand, this is more on the visual side rather than the backstory, but if you design a brand well, then you will take into account all of these things while you're doing it, and you'll test it out before you launch it. See how it looks on a website in a big chunk of text. If it doesn't look good, find something else, you know? Any other questions? All right, well, I think that's it. Did you guys find this somewhat helpful? You're welcome.
Legal, people are going to